From the moment the streets of Tehran and major cities across Iran erupted in protest in late 2025, the Islamic Republic faced a familiar, but increasingly dangerous problem: how to maintain control in an age where information moves faster than repression. What followed was not an improvised response, but a calculated act of state power. In early January 2026, Iranian authorities activated one of the most extreme instruments available to a modern authoritarian regime: a near-total shutdown of the country's access to the global internet. This was not a technical failure, nor an emergency measure taken in confusion. It was a deliberate, centrally coordinated decision approved at the highest levels of the Iranian security apparatus. Fiber optic gateways were severed, mobile data networks were throttled to near zero, and international connectivity collapsed almost overnight. What remained functional was Iran's National Information Network, a closed domestic internet designed precisely for moments like this, allowing the state to continue basic services while isolating the population from the outside world. The strategic logic behind the blackout was brutally simple. Protests can be crushed with force, but narratives are harder to contain. Images of security forces firing on demonstrators, reports of mass arrests, and eyewitness accounts of killings have historically provoked international pressure and fueled internal momentum. By cutting the digital arteries of the country, the regime sought to slow the spread of information, fragment coordination among protesters, and deny both Iranians and the outside world a real-time picture of events on the ground. Yet this digital kill switch also revealed the regime's underlying insecurity. A state confident in its legitimacy does not fear connectivity. Iran's leadership understands that control over information is as vital as control over territory. In this sense, the blackout was not merely censorship. It was admission that the regime no longer trusted its ability to compete in the realm of truth. What made this episode different from earlier shutdowns was the emergence of unexpected counterforce: satellite internet. As terrestrial networks went dark, small numbers of Iranians turned to low Earth orbit satellite systems that bypassed ground-based infrastructure entirely. Smuggled terminals became fragile lifelines, allowing fragments of information to escape the blackout and reach the outside world. The regime responded with urgency. Electronic jamming, signal interference, and legal threats were deployed to suppress satellite connectivity, transforming the crisis into a contest not just of policing, but of electromagnetic warfare. The battlefield expanded from streets and prisons into orbit itself. The blackout exposed a fundamental tension at the heart of modern authoritarianism. The more a regime relies on total information control, the more vulnerable it becomes to technologies it cannot fully dominate. In attempting to silence the nation, the Iranian state revealed something far more dangerous than dissent fear. When the Iranian state severed its connection to the global internet, it assumed that physical control over cables, cell towers, and data centers was sufficient to restore informational dominance. That assumption reflected a deeply outdated understanding of power. In the space created by the blackout, a parallel network began to take shape, not officially acknowledged, not centrally organized, and not fully controllable by the regime. This was the moment when satellite internet, and in particular Starlink, emerged as a shadow network beyond the state's immediate reach. Starlink operates on a simple but disruptive principle. Instead of relying on terrestrial infrastructure that governments can seize or shut down, it delivers broadband connectivity directly from low Earth orbit satellites to small portable terminals on the ground. For Iranian authorities, this posed a strategic nightmare. The regime could shut down fiber lines and mobile networks, but it could not easily shut down the sky. As a result, the blackout was no longer absolute. It was punctured. Inside Iran, Starlink terminals did not appear in large numbers, nor did they suddenly restore nationwide connectivity. That is not how power works. What they did instead was far more dangerous from the regime's perspective. They allowed small nodes of uncontrollable communication to exist. Journalists, activists, and technically skilled users were suddenly able to send images, video, and testimony beyond Iran's borders. Information escaped in fragments, but fragments were enough. In authoritarian systems, even limited leaks can unravel carefully constructed narratives. This development marked a profound shift in the relationship between state power and information control. For the first time, a private company, led not by a government but by an individual actor, possessed the technological capacity to undermine a sovereign state's censorship apparatus in real time. Elon Musk did not deploy troops or sanctions, he deployed bandwidth. And bandwidth, in this context, functioned as a form of strategic leverage. The Iranian leadership immediately grasped the implications. Starlink was not simply a communications tool, it was an intrusion into the regime's monopoly over truth. Every successful connection represented a failure of state authority. Every transmitted image was evidence that the blackout was incomplete. What emerged was not a revolution in connectivity, but something subtler and more destabilizing: a network that could not be fully mapped, fully controlled, or fully silenced. In the struggle between a centralized security state and decentralized technology, Starlink did not need to win outright. It only needed to deny the regime total control, exposing a critical vulnerability at the heart of modern authoritarian power. In authoritarian systems, even limited leaks can unravel carefully constructed narratives. This development marked a profound shift in the relationship between state power and information control. For the first time, a private company, led not by a government but by an individual actor, possessed the technological capacity to undermine a sovereign state's censorship apparatus in real time. Elon Musk did not deploy troops or sanctions. He deployed bandwidth, and bandwidth in this context functioned as a form of strategic leverage. The Iranian leadership immediately grasped the implications. Starlink was not simply a communications tool. It was an intrusion into the regime's monopoly over truth. Every successful connection represented a failure of state authority. Every transmitted image was evidence that the blackout was incomplete. What emerged was not a revolution in connectivity, but something subtler and more destabilizing: a network that could not be fully mapped, fully controlled, or fully silenced. In the struggle between a centralized security state and decentralized technology, Starlink did not need to win outright. It only needed to deny the regime total control, and in doing so, it exposed a critical vulnerability at the heart of modern authoritarian power. The emergence of satellite connectivity did not catch the Iranian state by surprise for long. Iran is not a technologically naive actor. For decades, it has invested heavily in electronic warfare, signal intelligence, and asymmetric tools designed to offset its conventional military weaknesses. Once Starlink terminals began to puncture the blackout, the regime moved quickly from denial to confrontation. What followed was not censorship in the traditional sense, but a battle fought in the electromagnetic spectrum. Unlike fiber cables or cell towers, satellite signals cannot be seized with police raids. They must be contested technologically. Iranian military and intelligence units began deploying jamming systems designed to interfere with satellite uplinks and downlinks, flooding targeted frequencies with noise to degrade or disable connectivity. This was not indiscriminate disruption. It was selective, adaptive, and increasingly sophisticated. In areas where Starlink usage was detected, connectivity became unstable, intermittent, and in some cases unusable. This response revealed something essential about the regime's strategic mindset. Iran did not treat Starlink as a civilian technology. It treated it as a hostile system, an intelligence threat comparable to espionage platforms or surveillance drones. From the regime's perspective, this was entirely rational. Information leaking through satellite connections undermined internal security operations, exposed the movement of forces, and compromised the state's ability to control escalation. In a protest environment, uncertainty is lethal for authoritarian control. Yet electronic warfare has limits. Jamming is resource-intensive, geographically uneven, and inherently temporary. It requires constant adjustment as signals shift and systems adapt. Every successful interference operation also reveals the regime's own technical footprint, forcing it into a reactive posture. The state was no longer simply enforcing silence. It was chasing signals. More revealing still was the legal and rhetorical response that accompanied the technical one. Possession of satellite terminals was criminalized, framed as collaboration with foreign enemies. This was a familiar move: externalize blame, securitize technology, and redefine connectivity as treason. But such measures betrayed anxiety rather than confidence. A state secure in its intelligence dominance does not fear antennas on rooftops. The electronic warfare response slowed Starlink's impact, but it did not erase it. More importantly, it confirmed a dangerous truth for the regime. The tools required to maintain total informational control were becoming more complex, more costly, and less reliable. Power was no longer exercised simply through force or fear, but through constant technological contestation, a contest the state could not decisively win. Authoritarian regimes pride themselves on their intelligence services. Surveillance, informants, data collection, and coercive monitoring are the foundations upon which internal control rests. Iran is no exception. For decades, its security state cultivated an image of omniscience, a system capable of detecting dissent before it spread and neutralizing threats before they matured. Yet the events surrounding the blackout exposed a far more troubling reality. The regime's intelligence apparatus was struggling to keep pace with the society it sought to dominate. The introduction of satellite connectivity fractured the regime's informational map. Intelligence systems are built on predictability, known channels, traceable flows, and hierarchical networks. Starlink disrupted all three. Communications no longer moved through monitored exchanges or state-controlled gateways. They appeared sporadically, vanished without warning, and reemerged elsewhere. This eroded the regime's ability to attribute, track, and preempt dissent. When information flows become decentralized, intelligence loses its advantage. More damaging still was the regime's failure to anticipate the speed and adaptability of civilian actors. Protest organizers did not require mass connectivity to operate. Small, resilient communication cells proved sufficient. The state could arrest hundreds, even thousands, yet still fail to identify leadership structures because those structures were no longer fixed. Intelligence doctrine rooted in centralized opposition collapsed against a decentralized reality. This failure manifested in overreaction. Security forces deployed blindly, relying on brute force rather than precision. Mass arrests replaced targeted disruption. Neighborhoods were locked down without clear objectives. Such measures create the illusion of control, but they degrade intelligence quality by overwhelming the system with noise. When everyone is a suspect, no one is truly understood. The cracks were not merely operational. They were psychological. Intelligence services depend on confidence, the belief that the state sees all. Once that belief erodes, hesitation sets in. Commanders begin to doubt reports. Field units question directives. The system slows. In moments of crisis, hesitation is fatal. What the regime confronted was not a single technological challenge, but a structural one. Its intelligence architecture was designed for a previous era when control over infrastructure meant control over society. That assumption no longer holds. The blackout intended to restore dominance instead exposed the fragility of a security state that could no longer fully comprehend the population it ruled. When regimes feel secure, their leaders appear. They give speeches, stage ceremonies, and project confidence through visibility. When regimes feel threatened, leaders retreat physically, symbolically, and politically. In moments of acute internal crisis, distance becomes a form of self-preservation. Iran's supreme leader was no exception. As unrest spread and informational control fractured, the system increasingly concentrated power inward, drawing its center of gravity away from the public sphere and into fortified space. This is the logic of the bunker state. It is not merely about physical protection from assassination or attack, but about insulating decision-making from uncertainty. Secure compounds, hardened command centers, and tightly filtered intelligence streams create an environment where leaders can operate without confronting the full scope of societal unrest. Yet this insulation comes at a cost. The more leadership withdraws, the more distorted its perception becomes. The supreme leader's isolation reflected a deeper strategic reality. The regime no longer trusted the surface of society. Public appearances carried risk. Open communication carried risk. Even internal reporting became suspect, filtered through layers of loyalty and fear. In such systems, intelligence does not flow upward cleanly. It is curated to reassure rather than to warn. The bunker protects the body, but it blinds the mind. This dynamic has repeated itself across history. Leaders who retreat under pressure often mistake silence for stability and absence for obedience. The streets appear quiet not because dissent has vanished, but because it has gone underground. In Iran's case, the blackout and the crackdown temporarily suppressed visible protest while deepening resentment beneath the surface. The state mistook reduced noise for restored control. The bunker state also reshapes governance. Decisions become more centralized, more rigid, and more reactive. Flexibility is interpreted as weakness. Compromise becomes impossible because the leadership no longer perceives society as a partner, only as a threat. This accelerates strategic error. When rulers see only danger, they respond only with force. The supreme leader's retreat was therefore not a sign of strength, but of narrowing options. Power concentrated in bunkers loses its ability to adapt. It survives, but it does not govern effectively. In seeking safety from unrest, the regime reinforced the very conditions that make future crises more fear: isolation, misperception, and fear at the apex of power. For most of modern history, power in international politics was monopolized by states. Armies, borders, intelligence services, and coercive capacity were firmly under sovereign control. Technology served states. It did not rival them. What the Iranian blackout revealed with unsettling clarity is that this assumption no longer holds. A private actor operating outside traditional diplomatic or military structures had acquired the ability to disrupt a state's internal control mechanisms in real time. Starlink did not behave like a neutral commercial service. In practice, it functioned as a geopolitical instrument, not because it was designed as one, but because its capabilities intersected directly with state vulnerability. A privately owned satellite constellation governed by corporate decisions rather than national command authorities suddenly shaped the informational balance inside a sovereign country. This marked a structural shift in how power is exercised in the international system. From a realist perspective, this development is profoundly destabilizing. States understand how to deter other states. They know how to signal resolve, negotiate red lines, and retaliate against identifiable adversaries. But private actors do not operate under the same constraints. They are not bound by treaties, electoral accountability, or traditional escalation logic. Their decisions can be opaque, improvised, and driven by incentives unrelated to state security. For Iran, this posed a dilemma with no clean solution. Confronting a foreign government risks diplomatic escalation. Confronting a private company offers no clear pathway for deterrence. Sanctions, threats, or legal declarations carry little weight when the infrastructure in question exists beyond national territory and physical reach. Power once externalized into orbit becomes difficult to coerce. This episode also exposed the West's own contradictions. While Western governments publicly emphasize sovereignty and non-interference, they quietly benefit when private technologies undermine adversarial regimes.